Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the council public meeting for Tuesday, the 22nd of October at 7 o'clock. I'll call this meeting to order, but before we go any further, there is a public hearing statement that I need to read, which goes like this. You can sing along if you know the words. If a person, public body, or specified person does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Richmond Hill in respect of a proposed official plan amendment or zoning bylaw amendment, the person, the public body, or specified person is not entitled to appeal the decision of the City Council to the Ontario.
The opinion of the OLT.
Okay, no singing. To the Ontario Land Tribunal and may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal, unless in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. I'm pretty sure Taylor Swift will be singing that in Toronto coming up. And she'll be better than you, Councillor. I'm sorry. All right. So I need to move a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Davidson is the name, right? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Disclosures of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof, notwithstanding anybody's ability to sing. And the scheduled business for today, we have two items. The first one is a request for comments, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, Steinberg Land Holdings for 40, 50, 60, 74 Stouffville Road. So the way that this will work for those of you in the audience that are members of the public, we'll be having a presentation for each of these applications today, and we will there'll be a presentation by the applicant, there'll be a presentation by our staff, and then we'll open it up to questions both online and also from members of the public. So if you're here in the public and you'd like to speak to council for up to 5 minutes on any of these issues, you're welcome to do so. And when the time comes, I will call you up. You can speak at the podium here and you'll have up to 5 minutes to speak to council. After that part of the meeting or the presentation is over, we'll bring it back to council. We will make our comments. All of the comments made tonight will be referred back to staff, but no final decisions are being made on either of these two things on the agenda today. So that's important. This really is just a meeting to discuss the issue and to hear feedback from both the public and from council. So with that being said, the applicant for Steinberg Land Holdings is Adam Layton. Okay, Mr. Layton, come on up. You've got 5 minutes to speak to council. Do you want our staff to go first? Why didn't you say something to me? You've been here before. You're just going to let me make that mistake. Thanks a lot, Mr. Layton. Okay, who would like to speak to us? You threw me off with the singing. That's what it was. The whole night's ruined now because of you throwing me off with the singing. Sorry about that.
Okay, to switch the slides. Yeah.
Okay, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and members of the public. This first item tonight involves the submission of a proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications for the lands municipally known as 40, 50, 60, and 74 Stouffville Road. To begin, the subject lands are comprised of 4 parcels located on the north side of Stouffville Road, east of Yonge Street. The lands have a total lot area of 0.74 hectares with a combined frontage of 124.6 meters along Stouffville Road. The lands presently support 4 single detached dwellings, which are proposed to be demolished to facilitate the proposed development. Adjacent land uses include single detached dwellings to the north and east, commercial uses to the west, and Stouffville Road to the south. The subject lands are currently designated neighborhood in accordance with the city's official plan and are located within a settlement area of the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan. The neighborhood designation permits low-density residential uses, such as single and semi-detached dwellings, as well as medium-density residential uses, subject to specific criteria of the plan. Medium-density residential uses such as townhouse dwellings and walk-up apartments, are permitted on lands fronting onto arterial street, up to a maximum site density of 50 units per hectare. The subject lands are further located within a priority infill area in accordance with the city's official plan. In terms of zoning, the lands are zoned urban, UR zone under bylaw 128-04 as amended, which permits single detached dwellings among other uses. The applicant is seeking council's approval of its official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications to permit the construction of a medium-density residential development. The proposed development is comprised of 108 back-to-back stacked townhouse dwelling units and measure 4 stories in height with a total floor space index of 1.48. The proposed townhouse dwellings are to be configured into 5 separate townhouse blocks as shown on the site plan, and will include outdoor amenity spaces such as private balconies and a communal area at grade. Access to the site is proposed from Stouffville Road, which will lead to an underground parking area with visitor parking and bicycle parking spaces located at grade. The official plan amendment seeks to amend the policies of the neighborhood designation to permit an increase in the maximum permitted density from 50 units per hectare to 146 units per hectare. The zoning bylaw amendment seeks to rezone the subject lands to residential 1 RM1 zone under bylaw 313-96 as amended to permit the proposed townhouse dwellings with site-specific development standards. At this time, planning staff have circulated the subject applications to internal departments and external agencies for review and comments. The purpose of the report is to provide council and the public an overview of the development proposal and has been structured for information purposes only, with the recommendation that all comments be received and be referred back to staff for consideration. Thank you.
Okay, and now for the applicant. It's like an encore performance almost.
Almost. Thank you, Mayor West, for the opportunity to speak. My name is Adam Layton. I'm an associate principal with Goldberg Group. We are the planning consultant on behalf of Steinberg Land Holdings, the owner of the subject property. And thank you, Giuliano, for the presentation. I think one of the key aspects that was outlined by staff is the fact that this site, and in fact, all the lands at the northeast quadrant of Stouffville Road and Yonge Street are in a priority infill area. But historically, for whatever reason, an infill study has never been advanced for this area. I would surmise or guess that might have to do with the lack of servicing connections to the area, both of which are factors that are being looked at by our client through the proposal. We've been working very closely with regional and city staff to facilitate a conceptual extension of municipal services from Jefferson Side Road up Yonge Street to allow more urban type development to occur within this area. And corresponding to that, we've also taken the liberty of preparing several options for what could occur through this infill or through the infill of this area that could be considered concurrent to staff or help inform a future infill study by the city. So included in the staff report, and as I've shown on the screen, we have 3 different options showing how the proposed development of this site could fit into an ultimate development framework for the area, similar to the nearby Harris Beach infill study. We have low density options, medium density option, and a high density option, all of which, again, would be predicated on the notion of municipal services being extended to the area. In terms of the statistics of the proposed development, as alluded to, we're here to discuss the redevelopment of the site with 4-story stacked townhouses, 108 units, lot coverage just under 40%. The matter at hand is not so much the use within the official plan, but the actual density. The limit would be 50 units per hectare. We're at considerably more than that, 145 units per hectare. But despite that, we are providing parking, which is very close to the requirements of the city. In fact, we are meeting the resident supply. We're just slightly short by about 6 spaces on the visitor supply. We are providing in excess of the required bike parking supply, and we feel there's a sufficient supply of landscaped open space and vegetation opportunities. You can see here on the screen the layout of the site. The building's in purple, split into 5 blocks. Communal open space mews through the middle, which I do have a visual rendering for later, and then other landscaped areas in green, and the pedestrian circulation and parking shown in white. In terms of massing, and then landscaping also shown on this slide. In terms of massing, we're showing the fairly standard back-to-back stacked townhouses. Owing to the grading of the site, the units are at least contemplated to be slightly elevated along Stouffville Road. We have received comments to that effect with some concerns from staff. We will be addressing that as we move through the process. But suffice to say that the intent would be that all units would have entrances to grade directly addressing the street or the internal mews. Each unit would have amenity space in the form of terraces, balconies, or rooftop patios. In terms of the breakdown of the site or the buildings themselves, you can see a conceptual cross-section here showing how each unit is comprised. The upper 2 units have rooftop patio space accessed through a pop-up. The lower 2 units are accessed from grade and would have balconies and terraces. And finally, this is a conceptual rendering of the programming that could be afforded through the central mews in the form of both passive and active outdoor landscaping. The benefit we have here is that the parking, you enter at grade into an underground, but it is confined largely to the area directly beneath the blocks themselves if I could go back more, there we go. There is just a connecting link between blocks, the north to south blocks that are parallel to Stouffville Road, meaning that the majority of the site is actually terra firma. There's no encroachment underneath, resulting in plenty of opportunities for large vegetation and landscaping to occur, as well as a robust suite of low-impact development measures to address water balance and stormwater runoff. Finally, to conclude, we have some conceptual renderings or an architectural precedent showing the anticipated style and landscaping treatment that is to be applied on site. Obviously, this is very preliminary. This is the first step in the process through the OPA-ZBA, and we'll keep working with staff through this process. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so at this point in time, we can open it up to members of the public. Is there any members of the public in the audience that would like to speak to this? Do we have some people signed up online? Oh, right, 1 person? Okay, so let's take that first. So Sandy Carruthers and Colin Petit.
Over you.
Hi,
Hi, everybody. So yeah, we can hear you. So you've got 5 minutes to address council. So go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I think what we're very concerned about, and I'm speaking also for many members of the street on Muirhead Crescent, which is directly behind the proposed development. There have been numerous letters sent prior to this meeting with regards to concerns by the residents. This is an area that's currently housed by small houses on properties that have well and septic. On the north side of the crescent are houses that were previously designated had to be estate lots, and so they've also been restricted in what can be developed. It's a heavily treed area. And Stouffville Road and Yonge Street. Stouffville is a 2-lane road with a very narrow shoulder. This area right now is struggling with traffic congestion already, to the point where Muirhead Crescent is having significant issues in traffic danger. We're having speeding volumes of traffic. Even this morning on Stouffville Road going westbound, I have video of people driving on the shoulder to try and get ahead and turn right. So already the infrastructure is under supporting the growth in the area. And the volume of growth that's presented in this is, I think, totally lacking in insight with regards to what's currently there in infrastructure. So I think anything would require a significant infrastructure adjustment before any development would happen in order to keep things safe for the current residents. This is an area identified as the Oak Ridges Moraine. The Jefferson Salamander is, there's already a sign closing the Stouffville Road for Jefferson Salamander traffic crossing. I don't even know if the town remembers, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a proposal for Stouffville Road to jog over to meet Jefferson. But when I speak to people from the town, no one remembers this, but there was a proposal for it to be jogged just east of us, over to Jefferson, and it was determined that that wasn't appropriate either. The concerns we have are in keeping with the current culture and character of our neighborhood. While we are small, it is a good bunch of neighbors, and this development is not in keeping with the character. It is at this point threatening our water supply, which we're all on well, and septic. I have questions with regards to the validity of the studies that have been submitted for that. I guess that will be up to the engineers to review. The second problem is more to do with the fact that there are very large trees already on those properties that are going to have to be culled. And I understand there are regulations with regards to that. I'd like to see more details about how the area will be replenished with trees and vegetation. This is really at the point where the two watersheds come either down to the city or Lake Simcoe. So it's very important protected land. The third thing is to do with the traffic congestion that will impact on Muirhead Crescent. If you look directly west of us at Jefferson and Yonge, there is a 4-story townhouse development right now that's been over 2 years developed. The traffic congestion on Jefferson Road has involved construction workers parking on Jefferson, which is fine. That's great. It's a much wider road. Stouffville Road has a narrow shoulder. There is no sidewalk. There's nowhere for workers to park. Muirhead Crescent is a very small, narrow road with very limited street lights, no sidewalks, and no shoulder. We've already had many dangerous situations where I have video, actually coincidentally, of people that have had to jump in the ditch because they're going to be hit by two cars passing. We have aggressive traffic already on the road that we've approached the town for help in getting speed bumps. And we don't have any idea when that traffic calming measures episodes will be happening, but this is only going to add to it. So there's significant distress amongst the residents on Muirhead Crescent with regards to this being an out of character development that is not really addressing the already strained infrastructure issues that are there. I would like to also point out that letters have been submitted by several residents, including Erica Domka, and we've also submitted a letter, so I'd like those reviewed. While we do recognize the importance of infill and growth in the area, I think that this is an overachievement of growth for this particularly sensitive area, especially given the fact that the infrastructure is not there to support it. When you look at the other developments just west of us with similar type of townhouse situations, there's large cutbacks from the road, there's sidewalks, there's places for people to actually ambulate. You don't see that here. And while the drawings they proposed are very nice looking, they're not in any way reflective of the reality of that environment that they're proposing to develop. So we have grave concerns, and we don't feel that the volume of people, the volume of houses being proposed is proper. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. As we said earlier, this meeting is all about collecting input and feedback from the residents. So we certainly appreciate you taking the time to do that. Okay, so I'll open it up to the folks that are in the audience here with us. Is there anybody that would like to speak to this issue? Don't be afraid. We won't sing. Are you sure? Okay, okay, come on up, sir. You're the brave one in the, everybody give the guy a hand. Just speak into the microphone, sir. So you need to just state your name and address for the record.
My name is Anthony Fasciano. I'm a resident on the Crescent. I was just kind of curious with if this proposal goes through, does that change the zoning for that whole area? So it is restricted to that project?
Well, okay, this isn't really a question and answer period, but I will indulge that. So this is just on the specific application that is being proposed today. It won't necessarily affect the zoning for other areas within it. It's only for that area.
The reason I ask is because you're with this project, you'll be having to tie in to the main water and sewage line
Mhm.
at the Jefferson Road.
Yeah, we'll actually, I'm sure that comment, I'm going to bring that up later in the meeting.
Okay,
Yep.
so I was just kind of curious if you're doing that, if you're going to provide that service right around, or how far that will extend.
Okay, no, that's a good question. Thank you. That's good input. Okay, anybody else? Sir, come on up. See, all it takes is for one person to break the ice, so good job. No singing. We're not allowing that. So just name and address, sir, for
Yeah,
the
Rob
record.
Reed, 86 Stouffville Road. So we're right beside this application. So my wife and I have lived there since 91. And as Sandy has mentioned that, the area has been unchanged really since many, many decades. So being right beside this proposal, we're sitting in our backyard this afternoon, enjoying the beautiful fall weather and looking over and imagining a 45-foot wall 5 feet from our property line and wondering what the total eclipse of the sun would look like. And really, that's what it would be. The shadow penetrating our backyard would be enormous. So that's one concern we have. We could understand if the developer wanted to develop all 8 lots at one time, all the way over to Muirhead, and that would make maybe more sense. But because it's a piecemeal, it's like he owns the 4 lots, so that he wants to try to develop it, and I understand that, his need to make a profit, but it just seems to be a piecemeal, higgledy-piggledy kind of proposal. So anyway, that's our take on it for the moment, so.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
No, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Okay, anybody else would like to provide comment? Okay, seeing none. So I'll bring this back to council. So Councillor Davidson, so you'll be happy to move a motion to refer all comments back to staff?
I would.
Okay, so go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the residents that came and thank you for the presentations. I'll start off right off the bat and say, I think this is way too much for that piece of property. And while I understand something will get built there, I hope there's much discussion about a more appropriate size. This is a huge amount of density for that little area. And I don't know if I'm allowed to comment on the applicant's presentation, but I was so confused by a layout that showed townhouses all the way to Muirhead when there are single family homes on Muirhead. I wasn't really sure what that slide was. So this, as the residents have stated, there's no sewers on Muirhead. So there's wells and septic. So when I hear about digging out an underground parking garage, I feel like that's a flag. So through you, Mr. Chair, can someone on staff help me understand what kind of environmental assessments and how we protect existing residents if there's going to be underground parking that folks that depend on well water?
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson. So a number of studies have been submitted in support of the application. Specifically, it's not necessarily environmental per se, but there are hydrology and stormwater management reports that have been submitted to support an underground parking structure, and those will be reviewed by city staff in their evaluation of the subject application to determine the appropriateness and any type of setbacks or restrictions that may be required to support an underground parking structure in this location.
Thank you through Mr. Chair. Just to confirm, so for me, this is the first time we've ever talked about a development where it's right beside a whole street that's on well water. Does that entail a different approach?
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson. So that's a little bit of outside my bailiwick. I would take that back to engineering, but I've taken a look at the reports that have been provided, and geotechnical, hydrology, and stormwater management reports have been submitted, and I'm presuming that those would cover off that specific question, but I can get back to council on that matter.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So building a sewer, I know from other meetings we've had, is an enormous expensive proposition. To you, Mr. Chair, can staff please explain how the sewer will be paid for this development, whatever it ends up being?
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson. So there is a portion of the sewers that would be covered by the city's DCs, and cost recoveries associated with that is being brought forward later this fall. Any local infrastructure on Muirhead that would be needed to support this proposed development. So that is storm, sanitary, and water would be the responsibility of the developer, and it would be at their cost. The region does not provide funding for local infrastructure projects.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, for the folks that are residents here, can you please explain what you mean by DC charges? And when you say the applicant will be responsible for supporting infrastructure on Muirhead, you're not saying they're going to be responsible to hook everyone on Muirhead up to new sewers and water, are you? What do you mean by what you mentioned?
So the development charges are collected across the city to support development, and a portion in the DC bylaw, particular projects that are required across the city are line items in the DC bylaw. So DCs are collected for a number of projects across the city, and this would be one of them. Not all of it is going to be covered, and if someone is proposing development that goes ahead that requires the services, that is where they are expected to upfront the costs. So in the case of this particular development, where there is no services in the area, the applicant has been working with city staff in the coordination with the region to look at bringing services to this area to support this development. If they do, if council approves this application, one of the things they'll be looking at is bringing the local infrastructure to Muirhead Crescent, and the opportunity to connect to those services for the residents in the area will be provided to them at their own cost.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So if they wanted to hook up, they would have to pay for it, to clarify.
That is correct.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I do want to say, having that many units come in and out from one entrance off of Stouffville will be an absolute nightmare. Stouffville is already a nightmare. There's backed up traffic all the way to Bayview some days. And I don't know how we mitigate that, but it is of grave concern, not just for the residents on Muirhead, but anyone who uses Stouffville to get to Yonge Street, which is pretty much everybody who lives west of Yonge. And through you, Mr. Chair, I know I'm pretty sure there's no specific environmental assessment, but it's a very wet area. Through you, Mr. Chair, can you tell me what happens if is an underground parking always, maybe from an engineering standpoint, possible? Or is it possible that the wet and the water and all the wetlands and things that are in that area could prohibit an underground parking garage?
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson, underground parking lots aren't always permissible. I can point you to numerous areas in North Leslie where we could not allow basements. So I would say to you that underground parking structures are not necessarily permissible. Through this review of the studies that have been submitted to date, they'll be determined whether or not the lands in question can support an underground parking structure on this site.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. My last question. So as I mentioned, I think this is way too much density. And is it my understanding that the application is asking for a bylaw amendment because the proposal exceeds density that's allowed for that area at the moment?
Through the chair, the application is actually an official plan amendment, which speaks to the density, their non-compliance with the density provisions of the official plan, which permits 50 units per hectare or 20 units per acre. So they're about 3 times the requirement. And we will determine the appropriateness of the density as part of the review of this application.
Thank you. I just want to say again, this is just the very first step, and I appreciate the engagement of residents, and we'll continue to be engaged on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Regional Local Councillor DePaulo, you'd like to second this motion to refer all comments back to staff?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, happy to support all the comments going back to staff, and what we're doing today is just the first step in the public process and the application process. Every landowner has a right to make application to the city to rezone their property, and then the public's notified. We have tonight. We have the comments from tonight that will be considered by our staff, and the process is long. There'll be opportunities for engagement, and this is an interesting start. What we're dealing with is exempted Oak Ridge Moraine land here, and there's not very much exempted Oak Ridge Moraine land remaining in Richmond Hill that hasn't been developed. Muirhead's, an example, but we also have a neighborhood designation on it, which permits what is allowed in our local official plan, but that the reason for that is to conform with public policy set by the region and the province. So one of the main things driving this application is the fact that on an arterial road, and it really doesn't matter where, that policy allows for a medium density. That policy allows for townhomes of the nature that's being applied for. So the city has an obligation now to either through an infill study or by another predetermination how services can be brought if this is permitted. If we're going to if the request is being made by a landowner to implement the density that is already called for in our official plan, then the onus is on the city to map out how that's going to happen. But the cost is by the residents, is borne by whoever comes forward and wants to take advantage of the of the change from the low density residential that exists and possibilities for higher density. So I always say no landowner is ever obligated to do anything with their property but enjoy it. There's never an obligation for anyone to move or do anything, but everyone will be accommodated who chooses to, by the city in a very fair process. That's our job, to make sure that process is implemented and landowners' rights are respected, but the environment is respected as well. When it comes to exempted Oak Ridge Moraine land, there are much more stringent considerations, and it had, by nature of the scientific reasons why that area is designated, the Oak Ridge Moraine. There are hydrogeological considerations that go beyond anywhere else outside of the Oak Ridge Moraine. So that will be carefully examined by our staff. I'm sure we're going to get excellent advice on that. And I do have concerns where we're talking about smaller parcels than what had been developed, say, on the west side of Yonge Street. On the west side of Yonge Street, there was such a large amount that was designed and planned at one time. Nobody fronted on an ulterior road, and there were concessions made to the city for how the streetscape would be addressed, and in ways you can with a much larger development. But on Muirhead, there needs to be a consideration of the fact that there'll be smaller land parcels coming forward one at a time. I have to ask the question because the delegation on behalf of the applicant alluded to an infill study that was abandoned. Is that accurate? Or?
Through the chair to Councillor DePaulo, there was no infill study done for this area. This area was converted into a priority infill area just a few years ago as part of the initial OP update. So it's relatively newer, identified as an priority infill area. So one hasn't been done at this time, and it's primarily because of the lack of services and the demand for development in this area.
Okay, so the expectation was just that we had some time before we needed to study this, and
That's correct.
yeah, so which is a lot of times the case. An application triggers a process, and that obligates the city to go forward and take a closer look in this area. So we're a long way from any decisions, a long way from any measurable standards to be implemented against which to compare this application. So I look forward to continued engagement with the public and our staff, and to see what can happen. But at the outset, I have to agree with the local councillor. To go 3 times what's permitted in density is quite a request.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have Councillor Tree.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So my first question is regarding to about this road, Stouffville Road. Is there any news coming from region when going to have a plan to expand it from the current 2 lanes to become 4 lanes?
Through the chair to Councillor Tree, as part of the review of this application, because it is a regional road, the application has been circulated to the region for comment, and we haven't received comments yet.
Okay, so that's my first question. Second one regarding to the FSI or the densities. So it's 3 times tripled almost above to the current approved one. So based on the current infrastructure along the Stouffville, so from city's perspective, is that going to be a problem, become a net battle later on if the road is not implemented in the next 5 years? Do you think a projection is going to be a problem for traffic jamming here?
Sorry, just to clarify, through the chair to Councillor Tree, are you referring to traffic only or
Yeah, that's
other
the traffic only.
Transportation?
Yeah, traffic. Transportation is along the Young Street. I'm assuming going to be have our Region Pass services there. My concern is regarding the traffic.
As part of the application through the chair to Councillor Tree, a traffic impact study has been submitted for review, which will take into consideration the impact of the development on Stouffville Road and the surrounding road network, including Young Street.
Okay, I just want to comment another thing. Just right on the north side, the south side of the street. This land now is on the north side. On the south side, we all know there is a big farmland. If I'm correct, it's being already purchased by Acorn, which is another big builder as well. So has city received any applicants from that piece of land? Because it's huge. It's almost 1/2 size of this place.
No, through the chair to Councillor Tree, the lands to the north, lands to the south, which are farmland. I am aware of the purchase of those lands. Those lands have remained in the Oak Ridges Moraine natural linkage. They are not proposed for development, and no applications have been submitted to date for those lands.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to also echo one of my experience this afternoon, 3 p.m. I drove along Young Street. I want to turn to this Stouffville. I wait for 2 signals, just 3 p.m. So how busy now is? So my concern regarding this application is it might be oversized or densities. Look at, this is only the phase 1, only for 4 units. If you look at the overall, they might have stacked townhouses or stacked apartments nearby. Also, on Young Street, there are 2 big buildings as well. So end of the day, if you only look at this FSI, maybe it's not that big. If you look overall, it might be oversized. So my concern here is at this time being, and this infrastructure going to be suitable for us to approve or not. So I'll ask maybe applicants to reconsider what is suitable for the neighborhood, what is suitable for 5 years or 10 years as long term. As long as the infrastructure is not there, transportation is not there, proposing something ahead of time above, it might be dangerous for all the people, not only for the people living nearby. I'm far away, I'm around 5 minutes away along the Bassa Street. Every day I drive through this Stouffville as my main course. It's very challenging for me driving now. Consider if you have more buildings built up along this area, turn left, right, it could be the headache. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Silovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the applicant and to the staff for their presentations and to staff for the staff report. I agree 100% with our Ward 1 Councillor Davidson. And as everybody has said up till now, as we know, this is the very start, the very beginning of looking at land use planning for this particular area. I've been on council for 10 years, and I know that this Muirhead area block, if I may, has been under discussion for a very, very long time, mostly with regards to the sewers. So that is definitely a concern, and would be a concern for anybody who's remaining on Muirhead. There's no question that this particular area, on the north side and the south side of Stovall Road, which abuts Young Street, would be prime infill area, which it is stated as being. So I believe we all understand and realize that there will be development here, but I do believe that the development must suit where it is going. And to have triple in this application, to have triple, and I'm astonished by that because I don't think I've ever seen that before, triple the amount of units per hectare is way too much. As everyone on council knows, I always say it's like, instead of putting a stamp on an envelope, you're putting an envelope on a stamp. And this is way too much. So I understand the applicants' need to redevelop this land, and probably what's going to come in the south of this as well. It will be heavily looked at, but I do believe that it would be very apropos for the applicant to continue discussions with our staff, and continue discussions with the local councillor, and also our regionals as well, our two regional councillors and the mayor, because this really is a development that abuts regional roads. And I know from when we have to, with Ward 5, when there's a discussion always about Young Street, that's always a discussion that has to be undertaken with regional matters in tow. So I agree with Ms. Carruthers. I want to thank her for her deputation. She spoke very well, and I agree with everything she had to say. There are so many concerns here that I definitely would like to see an infill study done prior to anything further happening here. We've had it done, as they were saying, in other areas. I know in Ward 5, and Harris Beach is the one in Ward 4, and we've had one done in Ward 5, which was the Weldrick, between Young and Kersey. So I think that these studies are, I believe these studies are very valuable. And I would hope that we are going to see something like that. Sometimes they're called secondary plans, sometimes they're called tertiary plans. Whatever it is, I believe that we need something here that is very formal, that we can look at as to what is the best way for us to do this as an infill area. So thank you again. Thank you to the residents. As members of council have all said, this is the very beginning of this discussion, and we are here to listen to you. And again, I urge the applicant to please continue their discussions, and I urge staff to consider discussing at least the very beginnings of some kind of boundary infill study here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson, and then Councillor Liu.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I do also want to thank the applicant and staff for the presentations, also for residents for coming out and sharing their concerns. One of the things I'd like to circle back to, and just to get some more clarification for myself, is with the municipal services that would be required to be extended to the area. And I'm circling back because one of the residents had made a comment about this appearing to be as a piecemeal. And so I'm trying to sort out, how would we be doing that moving forward here. So the applicant had put together what they felt the whole area could potentially end up looking like. Is that something where it comes to when we're talking about extending the services to this area, are we talking about that, or are we just doing a little, does it all work by piecemeal and we just go by project that comes along? How, if I can get some clarification on how that works, be appreciated.
Through the chair to Councillor Thompson. So it's not going to be a piecemeal type of development. We've actually required the applicant, because of the lack of services in the area, they've actually had to come up with an external servicing scheme that would bring services to the area in order to support this development and any other future development that would happen on these lands and the lands surrounding. So they would actually be bringing the services to this area, and it would support their development and then future development. So they're, you know, whether they acquired additional lands that they would develop later, the services would actually be brought to the area from this development. And then anybody who wanted to connect would pay their proportionate share to connect. It may also allow for future development to happen. So as part of the infill study, if you will, there isn't an infill study for this area. In the absence of an infill study, what we typically require is a concept plan. And it's to demonstrate how this development can develop without precluding the development of the lands in the surrounding area. So the applicant has provided 3 suggested scenarios of how this area could develop under the within the parameters of the existing OP designation that currently applies, with some consideration for increases as this application proposes. So the servicing for this area typically takes into consideration what is currently permitted in the OP designation and consideration for a little bit of a upgrade, if you will, give or take, that it may not exactly meet the neighborhood designation and if there's some intensification permitted. So as part of the review of this application, all of the servicing that is going to be reviewed will be looked at in that context. So it'll be looked at as potential for this site and for the whole of the area. And the applicant has submitted an external servicing scheme as well as an internal servicing scheme that looks at servicing that needs to be brought to this area, as well as what needs to be done for their particular site. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Through the chair, it does answer, and it adds for more questions.
Oh, okay. That's not what was intended.
So I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So if staff is looking at this in a manner that maybe they agree with one of those possible scenarios that were presented in front of them, in front of the staff, how would we then be approaching that to move forward in terms of when we could actually be looking at managing that in you know, the way the city would want to look at it? I mean, if we're not really sure, you know, in terms of timelines and things like that, how does this all play out?
So through the chair to Councillor Thompson, all of that would be part of the recommendations that come forward on this application. And it would include the servicing component, as well as if staff agreed with one of the scenarios that were supportable in the context of this application, we would bring that forward to council to make that determination of whether they agree or disagree. So that is why we ask them to provide some scenarios in the absence of an infill plan, is that we don't disallow this development if it has merit and should council wish to approve it. And it also takes into consideration all of the things that may happen in this area as part of an infill study. And that would also include servicing, timelines related to the servicing. It's also contingent on the region because this is an external servicing scheme that would have to be coordinated with the region as well. So all of that would come forward as part of any recommendation for approval or refusal as part of this application and the surrounding lands.
Right, and thank you. Through the chair, I would assume that would also include what the financial implications would also be to the city in terms of moving this forward at whatever the timelines are that the applicant would be looking for.
That is correct.
Okay, I appreciate that. Beyond that, I think all the things that have been said by Councillor Davidson, I think that's bang on. There's a lot of concerns there, and it is the logistics of what it is. I mean, traffic is definitely coming across Stouffville Road to get to the west side. Otherwise, they're going all the way up to Bloomington to get over to the west side. And I don't know how you get around that. It's those are going to be a lot of difficulties. And certainly the comments that was made by one of the delegates was in regards to the construction vehicles. I mean, I'm looking at this particular site. Well, maybe I should just ask the question. Would they be required to have construction workers parking someplace else and perhaps even shuttled in to manage a site like this?
Through the chair to Councillor Thompson. So as part of a future site plan application, should council consider this application appropriate, a construction management plan is submitted and approved by the city, and all these matters such as construction vehicles parking would be considered as part of that construction management plan, as well as the region's input, as Stouffville Road and Yonge Street are regional roads.
All right, I appreciate that. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too echo the local councillors' comments and all my colleagues' comments. I just will be very brief. I think it's a little bit too much on this side. You're turning 4 lots into 108 units with only one access. That's my main concern. And not only going west is a problem, I think going east is even a bigger problem. I don't know how people living in this site trying to go east, I think it's almost impossible. So I think that should be considered. Servicing has been mentioned, and through you, Mr. Mayor or Chair, 108 units, and I see 10 visitor parkings. Is that appropriate? Through you, Mr. Mayor?
Staff?
Through the chair to Councillor Liu, it appears to currently meet the requirements for visitor parking spaces.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Mayor, who will be doing the garbage collection and snow removal?
Through the chair to Councillor Liu, this is a private development, so it'll likely be private services.
Okay, thank you. I think my concern is the lack of snow storage. I don't know if the applicant or staff has considered that. I'm just bringing it out for as a comment. And I think it's not as much as something's going to build there is a big area, but I think the fundamental issue is not the height and density. The fundamental issue is traffic, which I think many of my colleagues have mentioned. Stouffville Road, if it has no plan to widen Stouffville Road, I don't think we should allow any development there because this is a huge problem as of now. So the reality is traffic. So that's all my comments, and thank you for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. There's Regional Local Councillor Chan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, staff, for the presentation first, and then by the applicant's agent, as well as I appreciate all the delegates, whether virtually and on in person. I concur with the local councillor comment and the speakers before me. A number of things have been said. I'm not going to repeat it. I just want to bring up 3 points. One is that I am concerned about that, it's actually specified in the report because we are not going to able to have sufficient land there if this application is moving forward in somewhat amended form in the future, that there has to be a way to link to the park, as I'm seeing in the north. So one of the thing is that when I see the word potential issue that we need to have the applicant to come back is on page 9 in the middle to ensure this aligning with the city policies regarding stormwater management and erosion control. Now, we already know stormwater right now and is an issue there, which you mentioned. I'm not going to touch on further, but those are really from both natural heritage planning and is certainly the from the more particular concern about technical aspects, how to really minimize, if at all, regarding erosion control and stormwater management. And relating to that, the second point I want to add on to the comments of my colleagues is also indicated on page 7 of the staff report. And at this time, I know that the staff are reviewing the Oak Ridges Marine Conformity Statement, which under this situation, because the land is within both the settlement area of Oak Ridges Marine, but also landform conservation area. So it's depending on the review results. I just want to highlight that's one of my concerns as well. And the third thing that, in addition to my colleagues and the residents' comments, which are well presented, specifically, I believe one delegate mentioned about the massing. And even looking at, I guess at this point in time, it's way too early. It's only about 2 months since this particular application has been deemed complete. So it's very, very early stages. But for somebody like the delegate mentioned that just live in the neighborhood, but even for me, looking quote unquote distance virtually, wow, it's really massive block. So obviously that is something we need to go back to the drawing board. I will submit, and as the local councillor said, a number of my colleagues also echo the comments. Way too much, way too many units for that piece of land. So I just want to add those comments. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'll just make some of my own comments. So I had a couple of questions. Was a little surprised in this staff report that I don't recall seeing much about the possibility of any sort of affordability being baked into this plan. And I realize this is early, so that's fine. But what can we say about that prospect this early in the process, if anything?
So as through the chair, so as part of the application, they have submitted the city's required housing affordability tool, which is currently under review by staff. So as part of the evaluation of the application, we'll take a look at that and evaluate the application against the current OP policies with respect to housing affordability. But there's no, in particular, housing affordability that is currently proposed as part of this application.
So, I mean, I'll just make the comment that if we are to see, regardless of the location, if we are to see an application like this in its built form, I would expect to see a significant amount of affordability baked into this plan. And that is a huge benefit. And we all on council have committed in various forms to providing a housing target and also some, whatever we possibly can to get as much affordability out of that housing as we possibly can. So that would be the first thing that I see not solidified in this plan yet. I'm not saying it's missing, but I mean, it's early stages, but this is the time for me to make comments, so I'm making my comments. I would like to see that in any, whatever ends up coming out the other end of this pipeline. I think that's important. Now, I mean, having said that, if it's single family homes that are going to be built there, then there's going to be no affordability because one home on a big lot like that is not going to be affordable. The only way we're going to get any affordability, frankly, in most of the GTA is to have forms of housing that provide, by their very definition, some relative affordability relative to housing that's built on the ground as in a single detached type of format. I know you've explained this now twice, and I'm gonna ask you to do it again. I know that the servicing, and what I mean by servicing is sewers and water mains in that area, is been a hot topic now for quite some time. So what does that look like for this particular application, but more so for the greater community? So the pipe, both sewer and water main, have to come from wherever they are at the moment, and I actually can't remember specifically, but I think it's out on Yonge Street somewhere, come over to this site in order to serve this lot in a scenario such as this. But how is that to any sort of an advantage to the rest of the community? And I suspect that it is. But what does that look like? Can you give us any more details at this time?
Through the chair. So now you're trying to make me an engineer instead of a planner.
But you're very multifaceted, I can tell. So, no, and I actually, in seriousness, I do understand that this is still very early in the process, but I know that this is a question that has been in this area. And so I'd like, given that this is the forum to kind of get some of these conversations started, I wouldn't mind getting that conversation started.
So I mean, I can definitely take back to get some more detailed information, but I've actually had the advantage of sitting in on a lot of these conversations for a number of years with the developer as he has come forward with a preliminary external servicing plan. My understanding is that this servicing, it will bring services to this area, period, down Yonge Street in coordination with the region to this area. So so like a new area, for example, in North Leslie that had no services, a developer comes in, brings all of the services that's needed to the area, because it's not sufficient, if you will, to just service these 4 properties. They will bring the services to the whole of the area. The services will then, all of these services, water and sewer, will be available to this area. If the existing residents can hook up to those services at a cost, because the developer has brought these services at his cost to this area. And my understanding is that not only will the services have to come to these 4 properties along Stovall Road, it will also necessitate the local services being brought through Muirhead Crescent. So in the end, as part of this application, if council determines that this is appropriate, services through the coordination of with the York region will be brought to this area as a whole.
Including Muirhead Crescent.
That is correct.
So the pipes will be in the ground, and then it will be up to some agreement, because the pipes have been put in the ground at the cost of the developer. There would need to be some arrangement made where the share of the cost plus the connection would end up then being available.
Correct.
All right. Okay, I think I don't know that I had any other specific questions related to that. The staff report, for those of you that are in the audience, if you haven't read it, it's a great read. But I would suggest that, I do want to just make sure that we have a fulsome conversation. I don't disagree with pretty much anything that was specifically said tonight, because I think we've had a good conversation, number of different aspects. But I think it is important for the residents in that area. You've come out tonight, and we appreciate that, and we've made some comments. I know we've received letters for this meeting and also over time to continue to be engaged in the process, because there's no question about it. At some point in time, something will likely end up being built on some of those properties. But what we're trying to determine here, like we always do, is, what's built, when it's built, and in what form will it be built. We are constantly, as councillors, looking for some sort of a balance of matching the amount of housing that we need to meet the needs of our community, to meet the targets that we've been obligated to meet under the provincial requirements, but also at the same time build in such a way that meets the requirements and the needs of the community as it evolves. So that's a kind of a nebulous balance to try to meet, but that's basically what I see our job when it comes to development applications being. pretty much every day. So it's very important to make sure that the community stays involved in that process. And I think it's also important, and I've said this to many groups of community members, it's also important as the process goes on to evolve the thinking, not to just what you don't want, but also what you do want. And that's an important way to keep the conversation going in a productive way. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Is there any other members of council that want to speak on a second round? See none. So we have a motion on the floor to refer all of the comments back to staff for further review. And all those in favor? Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming out. Our second item on the agenda tonight is a request for approval to expand permissions for additional residential units and increase minimum heights within major transit station areas with mixed-use center or corridor designations. And this is being initiated by the City of Richmond Hill. So we only have one performer at the mic tonight, and I believe, is that Sal? You're solo tonight? No, you don't even need an opening band. He's like the Rolling Stones, all himself.
No, I have backup.
Oh, okay. Backup singers?
Yep.
Very good.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On October 25th of last year, council directed city staff to report back on two initiatives related to the Housing Accelerator Fund agreement between the city and the federal government to provide opportunities to increase housing across the city. Council specifically directed staff to propose official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment to permit up to 4 residential units on any property currently zoned for single detached, semi-detached, and townhouse forms. Since 2021, the city allows for up to 3 units currently in such forms. The proposed documents before you will outline an addition of 1 additional unit from current permissions. The second component of the initiative is an amendment to the official plan and zoning bylaws to allow up to 4 stories as of right within the major transit station areas located along Yonge Street, Highway 7, and along Major Mackenzie Drive East near the GO station. These permissions would allow for heights identified as 3 stories or greater. Joining us this evening is Ms. Lindsay Toth and the consultant team who will make a presentation outlining the findings of the study currently done by staff and the consultants. The recommendation before you is that the staff report received for information purposes only, and that all comments be referred back to staff for consideration. At this time, I ask Ms. Toth to make a presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors, and engaged members of the public. My name is Lindsay Toth, and I'm a principal at Gladkey Planning Associates. In collaboration with LJ Architectural Partners, TY Lin, and Airden Burles LLP, we are leading the Housing Accelerator Fund project for the City of Richmond Hill. Tonight, we will provide a project update and present a draft official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. I would like to acknowledge the contributions of and expertise of city staff from many divisions, and especially Salvatore Aiello and Ryan Beck from Planning and Building Services, who have worked very closely with our team. The ultimate objective of this project is to facilitate new housing units. To do this, we propose permitting up to 4 residential units on properties that currently allow single detached, semi-detached, and townhouses. On the map, the distribution of these dwellings is indicated with blue, green, and yellow dots. We also propose permitting 4-story buildings as of right in major transit station areas that have a mixed-use centers or corridors designation in the OP. On the map, MTSAs are outlined in red, and the centers and corridors designations are colored. So we would be looking at permitting 4 stories where the colored areas are inside a red outline. These changes would allow for the construction of missing middle housing, helping to meet demand for housing in Richmond Hill and offer new housing choices to residents, including the ability to age in place. The project objectives will be realized through an official planned amendment, OPA, and zoning bylaw amendment, ZBLA. These documents are like a rule book for how you can use your property. The official plan sets a high-level direction for the whole city, and the zoning bylaw contains detailed rules for smaller areas of similar properties called zones. The rules make sure all buildings in an area fit and work nicely together by setting guidelines for their size and design. An amendment is a change approved by council to the rules. To allow 4 residential units per property, we will update the rules around additional residential units, or ARUs. ARUs are self-contained residential units located in a primary dwelling by dividing the dwelling into multiple units or in a detached accessory building, like a backyard suite. ARUs have been allowed in Richmond Hill since 2021. Currently, 2 ARUs per property are allowed for a total of 3 residential units, including the primary dwelling unit. This is mandated by the provincial government through the Planning Act. To date, 215 ARUs have been constructed, all as single ARUs on the property. This means less than 0.5% of eligible properties have chosen to construct ARUs. Our draft recommendations and amendments build upon research and analysis that was completed in earlier phases of the project, which began in January 2024. We considered the built form and demographics of the city, looking at census data, development applications, and existing dwellings and neighborhoods. We spoke with city staff from various divisions about trends and challenges that they're seeing in their work. We assessed the city's current OP and zoning approaches and considered the evolving provincial planning policy framework. Aird & Burles provided a legal opinion on certain elements of the Planning Act and associated regulations. We have followed how other municipalities in Ontario have allowed for 4 units in response to Housing Accelerator Fund agreements and learned from those examples. TY Lin studied the impacts of the proposed changes on the city's transportation and servicing infrastructure and made recommendations to mitigate or minimize negative impacts. LGA Architectural Partners created built form demonstrations for 6 residential properties and 2 mixed-use properties, which helped us to test the effect of different policies and zoning regulations. You can see some examples on this slide. Some key learnings from the built form demonstrations were that the building envelope zoning standards for the primary dwelling unit did not present major barriers to the development of 3 ARUs. In fact, singles, semis, and townhouses can all accommodate 3 ARUs, though unit sizes may be quite small in townhouses. Except on the largest properties, there is a trade-off between space for vehicles and space for ARUs. Requiring additional parking impacts the built form and the ability to achieve 3 ARUs. We found that there are properties in the city that can accommodate larger detached accessory residential buildings than are currently permitted under zoning bylaw 1321. Regarding the 4-story component of the project, the built form demonstrations illustrated some challenges with the official plan transition policies that employ a 45-degree angular plane. Specifically, we found that the angular planes produce exaggeratedly low maximum building heights on properties designated for higher densities. The effect is most acute on small properties that directly abut residential neighborhoods, and it prevents 4-story buildings in some cases. We used the built form demonstrations during our public engagement sessions to help people visualize the changes and the potential changes and to share their feedback. We held 2 in-person public open houses, 1 virtual public open house, and hosted an online survey. We also contacted school boards and other stakeholders for comments. Overall, there was mixed opinion. We heard from folks who were against the idea of gentle density in principle and held the belief that Richmond Hill's low-rise residential neighborhoods should be single dwellings with large yards. There were some people who disagree with the idea that Richmond Hill should build more housing of any kind and are against population growth in the city. We also heard from those who support the idea of gentle density, including permitting 4 units per property. Some threw broad support behind the idea of creating new homes, while others were more measured in their support and included specific conditions about how they would like to see ARUs deployed within neighborhoods. In general, there was agreement that housing affordability is a critical issue, that infrastructure must be upgraded with growth, and that ensuring quality of life in neighborhoods should be a priority. Combining and considering all of these sometimes conflicting inputs ultimately led us to a series of draft recommendations and a draft OPA and ZBLA. Again, to reiterate, our key directions for the amendments seek to achieve the project objectives of permitting 4 units and 4 stories with the intent to create more housing. We have proposed a targeted amendment with future harmonization to be undertaken through the OP review and the comprehensive zoning bylaw projects, which are ongoing. And of course, we've included all of the analysis that I've just described. I'll now walk you through some of the key directions that we've proposed. With the intent of facilitating 4 units, the draft OPA largely maintains the OP policies related to ARUs. It does update the definitions of certain terms, such as additional residential units, for clarity and to better align with the project objectives. A new policy is proposed to encourage the provision of outdoor amenity space, which may include shared spaces. The OPA establishes priority objectives for the Committee of Adjustment when considering minor variances related to ARUs. The amendment also clarifies that housing forms arising from the creation of ARUs are not subject to the locational criteria intended for medium-density residential developments. The draft zoning bylaw amendment implements the OP policies and provides appropriate development standards for ARUs. We opted to repeal bylaw 1321 and implement a new bylaw for ease of use. The new draft bylaw prohibits ARUs in flood zones and limits them in certain Greenbelt and Oak Ridges moraine zones, consistent with provincial policy. In all other zones, it permits up to 3 ARUs in conjunction with a single, semi, or townhouse for a total of 4 units per lot. It also allows up to 2 units in a detached accessory residential building, which will simplify Ontario Building Code requirements in many situations, making it easier and cheaper to build. The ZBLA maintains development standards for the primary dwelling unit based on the parent zoning bylaw and introduces appropriate development standards for the detached accessory residential buildings. This creates opportunity for larger units while avoiding overbuilding. We propose a requirement for a clear access path to all unit entrances for emergency services and permit multiple unit entrances on the front building elevation. The zoning bylaw will provide automatic exceptions for certain development standards to facilitate the conversion of existing accessory structures to ARUs. We propose parking standards, including the provision of bicycle parking, that vary based on proximity to rapid transit. This site plan shows a property that has developed 4 units and conforms to the proposed zoning standards. The primary dwelling has been divided into 2 units, and a new 2-story accessory residential building has been constructed in the rear yard and contains 2 units. TY Lin conducted modeling of the city's water and wastewater systems to assess the ability of existing and planned infrastructure to accommodate ARUs now and through the planning horizon of 2051. A model is a series of calculations based on data and assumptions that are fed into the model. Because a model takes averages across geographies and because models rely on assumptions, they are not precise. However, they can be used to assess areas of risk. Where engineers see risk, they will usually complete a detailed study of a specific service area, including collecting real-world data about water pressures and pipe flows. For this project, we assessed the systems with the conservative assumption that 1 in 10 eligible properties will build 3 ARUs, and we prepared maps demonstrating the degree of risk. Figure 1 is based on infrastructure that exists today. Figure 2 is based on the infrastructure once certain identified upgrades, which address existing known constraints in the system, are complete. The red areas and nodes represent high risk. The yellow areas and nodes represent medium risk, and the green areas and nodes represent low risk. Note that these maps are draft and will be continued to be refined. Now, high risk doesn't necessarily mean that failure is imminent and all development should stop. Conversely, low risk does not mean no risk. The model clues us into key areas where to watch and where upgrades may be required. The city needs to track actual ARU development and keep updating the model to reassess risk. If the risk becomes such that development must be restricted, there is a mechanism to do so through the city's servicing allocation policy. There were a few miscellaneous issues that came up over the course of the project, particularly during the public consultations. Tree protection, property standards, noise, and illegal parking were all found to be concerns that are adequately regulated by existing bylaws or are more matters for enforcement and are therefore not appropriate to address in the OP or zoning bylaw. An important recommendation arising from this project is the creation of a monitoring and evaluation program for ARUs. We suggest that data is collected through the building permit process on location, number, and characteristics of ARUs. This information will feed into those servicing models on a regular basis to allow the city to proactively monitor localized servicing issues. After a set period of time, we also recommend a complete review of the data and an evaluation of the effectiveness of the regulatory framework at creating more housing. I will briefly mention that 2 weeks ago, the minister, using new powers under Bill 185, proposed new draft regulations for the ARUs that would apply as zoning bylaws and would override local municipal bylaws. Of the 4 proposed regulations, only the maximum building separation could impact this proposed ZBLA. The province is looking at a maximum building separation of 4 meters, where we had proposed 6 meters. It is unknown if or when these regulations will come into force. They're available for public comment on the Environmental Registry of Ontario website until tomorrow. We'll continue to monitor this. Now, turning our attention to the 4 stories amendments. The OPA addresses the angular plane transition policy, modifying an existing exception to allow building components up to 15 meters to penetrate the angular plane. This will allow 4-story buildings to be constructed on mixed-use MTSA sites that directly abut neighborhoods. We also propose to update a few policies that restrict heights to 3 stories within MTSAs, allowing up to 4 stories instead. For the 4-story zoning bylaw, we recognize that most of the zoning bylaws in the city are not yet up to date with the OP policies around MTSAs and centers and corridors. We'll use an omnibus amendment to modify all the zoning bylaws to permit 4-story, 15-meter buildings or higher if that's already permitted by the enforced zoning in the specified geographies. We are now in the final phases of this project. Tonight, we shared the draft OPA and ZBLA. We also hope to hear comments from council and members of the public. Over the next few weeks, we'll review those comments and we'll return to council in December with final amendments and recommendations to be considered for approval. This concludes our presentation, but our consultant team will be on hand to answer any questions. I'll introduce our discipline leads. We have Kevin Martin from LGA Architectural Partners, who is the lead for urban design, Amar Ladd, who is from TY Lin and the lead for transportation, and Kevin Brown from TY Lin, who is the lead for servicing. Again, my name is Lindsay Toth from Gladkey Planning Associates, and I am the project lead and planning lead for this. Thank you for your time this evening.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Before we bring it to council, is there any other comments from staff at this time? Okay, is there any members of the public that would like to speak to this? We have one person signed up. Yeah, Michael Theodoros. Hi, Michael.
Hi, guys, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. So you've got 5 minutes to address this.
Great, thanks. So yesterday I actually provided a submission to council, and hopefully you've had a chance to read it, or maybe later this week. While I'm in favor of the concept of gentle density, I actually have serious concerns with the whole concept of by right zoning. It actually takes away from the ability for members of the community to actually come before you guys and provide input on projects of all sizes and scope. Now, I led off in my paper actually with a concern about the consultation. You may remember I actually sent an email around to council and mayor in June, actually expressing my concern when I saw a story in the yorkregion.com website. That was actually my first awareness of the consultation. And from then, I actually continued to actually have dialogue with planning department, expressing my concern again with the lack of awareness that I felt was occurring. I didn't see any signage near the Richmond Hill GO station. There was no mailers. There was nothing there that I could actually see and be aware of. And then looking at the engagement summary report, it's actually validated a lot of my concerns. It's showing that there were only 159 online surveys completed. 6 people attended a June 4th Oak Ridges Community Center meeting. Only 45 people attended a virtual session. 29 people went to Elgin Barrow. So basically, you had 239 responses to a city the size of over 200,000 people. I think that's a very bad sample size. I think when projects come before you guys and people are properly notified, you see a stream of people from all ages, demographics, showing their actual concern and input and interest in projects. Having only 239 people respond to such a major shift in policy planning by right zoning is a big concern, I think. And I think I'm actually helping you because later on, if this was to be passed, and then people start seeing things sprout about, they're going to wonder, hey, what's going on? What happened to the sign that used to be placed on a property? What happened to the mailer that came in the mail? That process seems to be over. So I also had a concern with actually the online survey as well. Salvatore actually provided me with a PDF of the survey. I wasn't sure why they singled out Richmond Hill GO Station, whereas a busy place like Richmond Hill Center or Bernard are actually more busy transit hubs, more frequent service. And actually, as I discovered, the YRT will actually have rapid service that will actually be 9 minutes during rush hour on November 3rd, 12 minutes midday, 10 minutes on rush hour, far beyond what is actually on local cores like Major Mackenzie that was singled out. Again, you've heard me talk a lot about the GO train, the poor service there. I know Councillor Davidson actually mentioned too her experience of taking taxis from the GO station due to poor service. So the MTSAs are not created equal, and that's something I've actually made clear to council through multiple submissions. Also, like I've also brought, and I raised this actually in the September submission, the issue of unintended consequences, short-term rental accommodations. There's nothing here that could actually forbid these from occurring. So what would actually prevent people from buying up single-story homes, expanding them to 4 stories, staying in one part of the room, and then renting them out? In my submission, I actually showed like on Airbnb, Verbal, there's over 1,000 listings right now without any such major shift in planning. My guess is actually it would multiply. And I actually shared an email I got from Markham. They actually have had a STRA thing forbid since 2018. One of the reasons that is it impacts affordability, it impacts availability. They go hand in hand. Now, instead of just actually being negative, in my submission, I actually provided some opportunities that I think you guys have to look at. I found out through Metrolinx that there's over 343 surplus parking spots in Richmond Hill GO Station and 171 at the Langstaff. That's prime land. It could actually be a joint opportunity with the feds, province, and Richmond Hill to take a look at those particular parcels of land. Same deal, I saw Major Mac, they're looking at the library land, and they've got some really interesting things for a public space, but why not some housing right there? You've got transit going in 4 directions, including the Viva stop right at Major Mackenzie. Why not have a parcel of that city land allocated for housing? Great place there, community hub, steps away. So just in closing, while I don't have an issue with gentle density, I do have a big concern with the by right zoning, and I think you really have to look at that. My recommendation would actually be to go extend the consultation phase through the rest of the year and go to Richmond Hill Center, Bernard, Richmond Hill GO Station, Hillcrest Mall. you need to get more voices because right now it's very slim, and that's my my thing. It looks like I run out of time here. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Theodoros. I really appreciate that. So I'll bring this back to folks that are in the audience. Is there anybody that would like to speak to this at this time? Come on up, sir. So just state your name and address, and you've got 5 minutes to speak your mind.
Thank you. Thank you, Council and Mayor. My name is Paul DeBurtis. I'm a resident of Richmond Hill at 100 Winchester Lane, also a property owner in Richmond Hill. I saw the proposals for the ARUs, and I think the consulting team and staff did a great job. I attended one of the open houses. I didn't have any concerns, and I just wanted to present my official support. And I believe this is a great opportunity to allow for different housing types. Having 2 young children myself, I think these types of initiatives are great, as the typical housing models are not working and are not affordable to everyone. So bringing in some slight density and some more housing option, I think is a great initiative. And in following the steps of other similar municipalities and also the Housing Accelerator Fund municipalities, I think Richmond Hill is doing a great job in pursuing this initiative. So I hope it passes and can be implemented in the near future. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, sir. Is there anybody else? Okay, seeing none. So I'll bring this back to council. We've got a couple people with their virtual hands up. Councillor Silovitz and then Councillor Shu. So Councillor Silovitz, if you can move that we refer all comments back to staff, and then Councillor Shu, if you can second that, that'd be great. So Councillor Silovitz, go ahead.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you, and receive the presentation with thanks. I want to thank Mr. Salaiello for all the work he's done here. I want to thank all of our consultants for all the work they've done here as well. Mr. Theodoros, thank you. You always bring such salient points to the conversation. And Paul, thank you as well. It's not often that we get residents who stand up and say that they fully support something with land use planning. So thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. However, I have serious concerns with this. And I know that I've shared these concerns with Mr. Aiello and the consultants as well. I do believe that the city has done everything possible to engage the residents, Mr. Theodoros. Unfortunately, it is sometimes almost impossible to get the type of engagement that we would prefer. So 239, I believe that was the amount, in actually is not bad. I know it's not good when you look at the actual numbers, but that's not bad for us to get those people engaged in something like this that is very difficult for the common man to understand without having the background of everything that there is that with regards to land use planning. So the only thing I'm going to say here is, if I may, through you, Mr. Mayor, perhaps to Mr. Aiello, he can answer this question. Referring back to what Mr. Theodoros was saying about as of right, are we not governed by provincial legislation which legislates us to do this? Are we not completely bound by that legislation? And because of that, where do we actually sit, given all the changes that they make all the time, including the ones recently? Where do we actually sit with being in control of something like this that is so municipality centric? And from what I understand, it's my understanding that the 4 stories or the 3 stories as of right, this is all inscribed in provincial legislation. So I know we can write up a zoning bylaw, but how does it actually protect us or protect our residents? Through you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry to put you on the spot, Sal, but maybe you've got some answers.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. There are 2 components to the question. One is the provincial policy document, ANAC specifically, allows for ARUs to be permitted across the municipality in single semis and towns as of right. Council did approve a zoning bylaw in 2021 that facilitated the planning act of the day. Since that time, it's been changed twice to increase the availability of ARUs to the community. And as was indicated by Ms. Toth, the province is also looking at new regulations that are trying to withdraw any limitations or barriers to facilitating ARUs. So all the changes to the Plan Act since 2011 to present date has been to facilitate ARUs and remove any restrictions that were deemed restrictions by the province. So that included parking, that includes at the moment GFA considerations. Locational criteria was the last one that they changed, because previously the current bylaw allows ARUs to be located in one in the house and one in the backyard. The Plan Act changed and required that the restrictions allowed 2 in the house and none in the backyards, still a total of 3. The current policies still maintain the 3 total, but the question is how it implicates parking standards. So the council is quite right. The Planning Act mandates the ARUs as of right, and the Planning Act regulations are regulations as a form of zoning bylaw in accordance with the Planning Act. So they override provisions of the current bylaw 1321, which precludes development of ARUs. So they've been overwritten when Bill 23 came into effect and continue to be so with Bill 185. As far as the general comment on zoning, the Planning Act also requires that official plan amendments be implemented in a reasonable time period to implement the official plan policies. So that would, in this case, be dealing with ARUs specifically, but it's any designation in the official plan that has not been rezoned. Appreciate that the majority of the town's zoning bylaws are quite old. There's 40 parent zoning bylaws, some that date from the 40s. And the city has initiated a comprehensive zoning bylaw review. It's currently going through the process. And through that mechanism, the official plan policies will be bringing forward as of right zoning in accordance with whatever policies the official plan envisions for the various designations throughout the town.
Thank you, Mr. Aiello. I appreciate that. That's what I mean. in simple language, it's what what the provincial government tells us we have to do. So discussions in this regard should also be had with our MPPs, because they are the ones who represent the residents at the provincial level. And unfortunately, something like this, when it comes to the Planning Act and land use planning, it always comes down to the municipality who has to make these bottom line decisions, but they're actually not bottom line decisions, in my opinion, because the decisions have already been made, one on top of the other above us, to which we have to conform. So to Mr. Theodoros, I completely understand your concerns. I strongly suggest that you speak to our MPs, and I believe we've had that conversation before. And I would also urge all residents to take a much more of an interest in something like this, because it speaks to what our provincial government is going to permit the 444 municipalities of the province of Ontario to do within the confines of their own municipality. And what we have no choice, what we have to conform to. So thank you again. I know my time is running out. I just, I am very concerned, and I will remain concerned. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with this, but we do need more housing. This is a missing middle but to me, it's also a red flashing light. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor. So Councillor Shu, you'll second it?
Yep, I would like to second it, and thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. Before I make my comment, I just want to clarify two things first. This amendment applies only to MTSA, regional corridors, and mixed-use centers. But outside of these areas, fourplexes and 4 stories application still not permitted, right? Am I correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you are correct. We are not dealing with the 4-story height permissions that are typically allowed in the MTSAs or along arterial roads. Those are separate policies under the official plan. We are not dealing with those at all.
Okay, excellent. And there is no contradiction with the updates to the comprehensive zoning bylaw that the city is currently working on. Is that correct? There's no contradiction. This is totally different things, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, there won't be. This project policies that we're dealing with tonight will be in advance of the comprehensive zoning bylaw. This includes an official plan amendments, which will have to be implemented in the future through the comp bylaw. So any approvals the council deems appropriate to the zoning bylaw as envisioned for the 2 components of the study will ultimately be wrapped up again into the comprehensive zoning bylaw holistically.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, the following is my comment and also my advice and suggestion for the city. Does the city has authority to make any exceptions for the properties with seniors residents or those designed for accessibility that would prevent them from being eligible for fourplexes and 4 stories application? Because I think these 2 types of properties could make the exception because it's not appropriate for fourplexes for seniors residents and also for accessibility who's living in the property.
I'm not entirely positive I understand what you mean, Councillor, and I'm not sure. Do you understand what he's getting at? Could you restate your question, Councillor? Sorry.
Actually, are there any exceptions the city is taking any consideration to make any exception for properties with senior residents or those designed for accessibility that would prevent them from being eligible for fourplexes? To make some exception within our authority. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Sal.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the applications before us are specifically dealing with single family homes, semi-detached and townhouse forms, so ground related. What the councillor is suggesting is a higher density form, medium, if you will, and also specific to a group of individuals. That would be something that would be reviewed as part of the comprehensive zoning bylaw review as to appropriate locations and incentives for that type of development.
Okay, I see, understood now. So in my opinion, since the council has approved the acceptance of the $31 million HAF from the federal government, so I believe this step is only a necessary housekeeping measure to comply with the conditions for receiving the funding. And I think, but on the other hand, the residents will likely have strong opposition as the higher density and increase in short-term rental accommodations will negatively impact their comfort levels. And also, infrastructure may not handle higher density growth in a short time frame. So I think this report or this decision complies with the provincial or federal requirements for HAF, but does not necessarily increase affordable housing or respect the residents' comfort. That's my comment, but we have no choice because it is only a housekeeping measures to comply with the requirements by the federal government. So my last question is, could the staff comment as to how these changes will use existing municipal infrastructure more efficiently instead of making a lot bylaw amendment to save more costs? Is it possible to just using existing municipal infrastructure more efficiently? Is that through the chair?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent of the additional residential units specific to single semis and towns are utilizing existing infrastructure more efficiently. And that's part of the recommendation the staff and the consultants are making, that we keep an eye on it, because the existing communities, anything predating 1990, if you will, were designed and built with specific infrastructure in mind. And through the time period over the last few decades, infill has occurred, more population has occurred in those areas, consents, for example, and now we're adding ARUs to that. So it will be utilizing the infrastructure of water mains and sanitary specifically at its optimal. And that is what we're trying to keep an eye on over time. This is actually a new mechanism that we've developed to understand how existing communities are being impacted by increased development over time, specifically the infrastructure, which we didn't necessarily have a decent handle on. This tool actually allows us to predict. And once we understand where ARUs are located, one may not cause a problem, but if you have a string of them in a specific area that impacts a specific sewer, we would, engineering staff would have the ability to trigger a review, a very site-specific review of that sewer to look at flows and see if there's an issue with it. And if there is, plan for upgrades if appropriate, or just confirm that it's not an issue on a site-specific basis.
Thank you so much. That's all about my comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tree.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question has a lot, so if I'm missing or pass the first round, I might go to the second round. So the first question on this report, thank you so much for prepared report. I know there's many pages and many contents. On the page 2 background, we talk about the Housing Accelerator Fund, HAF. Is this fund going to be applied or going to become a part of the incentive to promote this warehouse unit?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. The two initiatives that I discussed this evening are a component of the HAF agreement, specifically initiative number 9 that speaks to consideration by council to increase the ARUs from 3 to 4 and from increasing the heights from 3 stories to 4 stories within the MTSAs that have corridor or Senate designations.
Is it only for policy or is for money, like an incentive? If you build up something like it's from 3 to 4, city can give you maybe some amount of money. Is that not the case, or just
I think
policy?
what he's asking.
So, yes, it's not specifically an incentive to pay individuals to build on. The incentive is to facilitate and remove barriers to facilitate the development in the
policy or policy.
If I may, though, I thought what I heard, and I think this is an interesting point. It is possible that a building in like a 4-story building in the MTSA could also qualify for some of the HAF funding, although we have not finalized our HAF, our community improvement plan that will help distribute the HAF funding. But yes, it is possible, right? That a building that's allowed because of this could also receive incentive funding from HAF.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, potentially, depending on what it's geared for, it may be for affordable housing.
Right.
And they might qualify for that. It also might qualify for infrastructure improvements. That has not been determined yet, but this is specifically to facilitate more affordable housing because of the uniqueness of the location and the size of the units we're talking about.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. My second question is on the page 3 regarding the scope. If I read clearly or understand clearly, the scope of this additional housing is only along Yonge Street, Highway 7, and the new GO station. That's only 3 locations were targeted, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it's a very specific direction. We're looking at where zoning does not permit 4 stories or greater. So that's the focus of the zoning bylaw. You will appreciate it's very focused and has identified existing bylaws that don't allow that height. And the OPA identifies restrictions across those corridors where there might be limitations for one reason or another. The only place that staff is recommending no change is within the village core area. And that's because the policies either facilitate the 4 stories, say on Church Street, for example, or they only require 2-story along Yonge Street. But that's a cultural heritage, the reason for protecting that area. And we're not recommending increasing heights specifically to maintain the street wall. Having said that, that village court does permit higher densities above.
Yeah, that's my last question. Your answer.
It still allows for the more specifically dealing with a very focused restriction in the policy documents.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I just want to clarify. So this is not something on like Beeville Street or Leslie Street or other small streets. It's only along the 3 major corridors. Thank you so much. My next question is on the page 14. Page 14 lists all. Okay, let me go back to 14 as well. It's long. I see that bottom page 14, there's a tons list of additional to the foregoing. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment will not permit ARU in the following area of the city. So, apologize, this one. In terms of the development standard, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment would establish a following development standard where ARU are permitted. I see tons of recommendations with a lot of details, meters, distance, whatever. Are this information or this requirement, detailed data, recommended to city or is coming from province? So is it a standard for across entire Ontario or just specific for our city? The page 14 to page 15, you can see there are 10 bulletins at the minimum, lot of details.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. These are the typically design standards that we're looking at development of residential properties, not mandated by the province. The province will potentially dictate what you cannot do. So, for example, the lot coverage that they may be bringing forward will be a limitation. But the standards that you see before you are specifically associated with primarily the detached structure, because we are not affecting the locational standards for the primary residential dwelling. Whatever those are required in the parent zoning bylaw today, those exist moving forward. We're requiring a clear pathway along wherever the doorways are to the units. It has to be a safe and clear pathway of at least 1 meter so that the emergency services can get to that location. The development standards otherwise that you see recommended are specific to the detached structure as to where it's located in relation to the rear and side yards or flankage yards, as may be the case. The height of the accessory structure actually has been reduced from the current permissions. And we also have proposed limitations to balconies and rooftop amenity areas. Those things have been and increasing side yard setbacks from current permissions. And the reason for that is to address community input on privacy issues. But the specific reason why we did that. We also looked at comments about open space and tree protection and groundwater flows. That's why we're also recommending the 50% of the rear yard is maintained as a green space, if you will, to facilitate all of those combined measures.
Okay, thank you so much. The reason I bring this one here is because I'm not sure how many of the council members are expert for those type of the detailed designs. So we are not, if tell me 2 meters, what that mean? Maybe I'm not quite too insurance. So I just want to bring this attention to our staff. please double check all the details here, just in case we don't slip something from our finger. For us, we're not SB, so it depends on your specialties here in this area. Please double check. So otherwise, for parking, I have same questions below from page 16, 15 to 16. So there are lots of detailed regard parking space ratios requirement. Still same thing, we are not expert here. The details here list all the detailed requirements. Please double check and verify with the staff. Also we verify with our tech team. So we depends on your specialties. And definitely, so your feedback, your verification will be very critical for this motion. Don't come back, summarize and saying, you did not pay attention, counselor, you are the counselor, you pay attention to those details, but we're short of that expertise in that certain area. So I think that's next one is parking. Yeah, the next one is page 21. I think you also answered certain of them. This regarding to all the effective OPAs. Young Bernard, Village Core on 16th Street, Carnival, etc. So I will not question too much because it's a lot of details. As you mentioned, in my word, I have two concerns. One is KDA for Bernard, another one is for Village Core. As you mentioned, the Village Core angular plan, just like you mentioned, sometimes it's only 60 degrees, only one on the center state. The remaining one will be still same as before. So I think this one is because protection of our heritage. We don't change it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Regional Councillor DePaula.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question. Should the province go ahead with their proposed or what's being discussed legislation, what would the process be if we were required to have their 4-meter distance? If we went forward as proposed with 6-meter maximum separation, then the province brings in legislation.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if the province does in fact pass a regulation and the after the zoning bylaws in full force and effect, the effect is that that provision will be null and void. So
you don't have to come back to council and do another amendment?
No, not because the Planning Act dictates that the regulation is a zoning bylaw unto itself. So anything that contradicts that bylaw overrides anything that the municipality has done with respect to conflicts.
Okay.
And if they do not, if they do it sooner than later, we will obviously modify the provision to reflect the regulations before we bring it forward to council for consideration.
Okay. And I'm just curious what the timeline might be with this. So it's a public hearing and we're the applicant and taking back all the comments, and when do you think you might be back to committee of the whole?
I believe that the next scheduled item is on December 11th, council, when we will bring forward the staff report outlining any comments that we received, any amendments to the proposed documents based on comments from the public, comments from yourselves, and also comments from stakeholders and internal staff on these forms of the proposals. And we will bring it back for the December 11th council meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I'd like to thank you for the report. Certainly, there's a lot that's happened in the past couple of years with changes coming forward, and I understand trying to deal with a lot of these gaps that come up are not an easy thing to do. And of course, I'm going to ask about some of those gaps because that's just the kind of guy I am. So I don't know if we're able to pull up page 16 from the presentation that was brought in or not, but what I noticed on the presentation, we're showing for accessory structures that the distance from property lines, thank you very much. You've got a 1.2 meter setback, or roughly 4 feet. Whereas I believe in our current zoning bylaws, an accessory structure is eligible for a 2-foot or 0.61 setback. So if somebody was wanting to use their existing accessory building as an ARU, would that, based on what we have here, whose rulings would supersede here? So, I mean, if would they be allowed to set up an ARU if they were less than the 1.2?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have considered that issue because people can convert a detached garage, which may be 0.6 meters from 2 of the yards, if you will. So the bylaw would recognize a conversion of the garage area to a residential. In addition, it would also allow for a second story as currently envisioned, but the second story would have to be set back 1.2 meters from the property lines. So it would facilitate that as opposed to requiring residents to go to a committee of adjustment for relief or a zoning bylaw. So we recognize that that's a current permission under 1321, just allows the 0.6 meters to go straight up to a 2-story house at 0.6 meters across. We don't think that that's appropriate, and we're recommending a step back in addition to the other restrictions I mentioned earlier.
Understood. Thank you for the response. Through the chair, if I'm understanding correctly, we're talking specifically to the MTSAs, and we're talking about the permissions that currently are for 3 stories or greater, that we're looking to move those to the 4-story and greater. I guess my question is, and you've already answered about the village core, but within the MTSAs, do we actually have any that are not designated for 3 stories and above currently?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are 3 areas that have restrictions specifically to 3 stories. One is the Bernard KDA, one is the village core, and the other one is the Richmond Hill Coal Station. There are restrictions to the podium heights, if you will. The other restriction that's globally affects the corridors is the angular plane policies in the official plan primarily. And the issue on that one is that you measure from grade at the property line and you strike a 45-degree angle. You can intrude above that 45-degree angle by 10 meters. Staff and the consultants don't agree with that 10 meters because you can appreciate that the residential dwelling within the neighborhood next door can have 3 stories. But otherwise, the application of the angular plane is currently written would restrict it to 2. So there's not really a transition. It's usually transition means you go slightly higher, not 1-to-1 relationship. So we're recommending that it be changed to 15 meters, which would facilitate a 4-story, say, stacked townhouse, if you will, or townhouse development, or part of the podium with appropriate setbacks, obviously, but facilitate it to fill in that gap. So those are the general requirements. The only one we're not recommending from an OP policy change, again, is a village corp, because it either allows for the 4 stories or it's got a very unique character that needs to be protected.
Thank you. And through the chair, you obviously saw where I was going with my next question. And that is about the 45-degree angular plane. So if I understand correctly, so if it is within the MTSA and you still have designations where they're at less than 3 stories, then would we be allowed to require a transitional setback for those particular ones? Or are you still saying that they would still be able to put that 4-story wall straight up?
What the recommendation is that in proximity to the neighborhood directly, the maximum is 15 meters or 4 stories in that location. The balance of the property, because we're talking the highest use in the centers and corridors, will be governed by the angular plane policy. So the higher development that's closer to, say, the arterial road would have to be stepped back further away from the neighborhood as the development goes higher. So the angular plane does not go away. We're only modifying that specific transition, typically within 7 meters, if you will, of the property line, to go to the 4 stories as opposed to the 2 stories currently envisioned by the policy as written.
Right. And right at the moment, my question was specific to within the MTSA. So
Yes. It transitions within the MTSA as the angular plane does. So they have to stay within the 45-degree angle as they move closer to the arterial typically.
okay, appreciate it. Through the chair. And I don't know if we can get to slide number 21, because I guess my next question would be where we're now abutting from an MTSA to a neighborhood. So, which is what we have here. And I believe you've already said you don't agree with what you heard or were told in regards to doing that 10 meter before the 45 cuts in. Is that correct?
Through you, yes, Mr. Councillor Thompson. The concern that the staff has is that the permissions under current zoning for single-family residential is 11-meter height requirements. But yet in the transitional policies next door within the MTSA boundaries, it's 10 meters. So it's actually going down as opposed to, so someone can build a 3-story single-family residential next door, but the MTSA would be limited to a 2-story. And we're suggesting that the concept of transition would be that it goes to 4 stories and then the angular plane would dictate and control where the highest points are on the diagram as you go closer to the Yonge Street, for example, where the higher densities are permitted. This is a unique condition. It's not the same thing that you will find in Bernard KDA. For example, where the measurement is taken in the same condition, the measurement's taken 10 meters up and then you strike the line, right, in that condition. That also applies in the regional center, same condition. So you'll actually get higher buildings abutting the communities in those locations, similar to the Church Street properties. You also get the 4 stories there, but everywhere else, like Hillcrest Mall, for example, the west end of it will be limited to 2 stories if development ever occurred along the west property line. But on the neighborhood, it could go up to 3 stories.
Right, thank you. And through the chair. So looking at what we see on the screen here right now, where we are talking about between the neighborhood and the corridor, I mean, you know, it's looking like the building that's showing up as a mid, it's not meeting the 45-degree, or are you saying the 45-degree doesn't apply for the first 15 meters? Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, currently it exempts the 10 meters. We're suggesting we increase that to 15. But that triangle on the left side, closer to the neighborhood, would be the area that would be exempt.
Okay. Those are all my questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Saul, and thank you, everyone. I did have a question. I think it was on slide 15 of the presentation that talked about parking varies with proximity to rapid transit. So I'm still unclear as to whether if I want to have 4 separate abodes on my property, I have to provide 4 parking spots. I'm always confused about parking in this particular project. Are there any parking requirements with the 4 units specifically?
So you, Mr. Mayor, yes, they vary depending on where you are in relation to the MTSAs. So within the MTSAs, there are neighborhood designated lands. Within those areas, because of Bill 185 that removed any parking minimums, there are no parking minimums within the neighborhoods enveloped by the MTSAs. So that's one area that you'll see in the draft zoning bylaw in area 1. It's 0 parking for the additional residential units. The second area is within 400 meters of the center line of Yonge Street, the center line of Highway 7, and the center line of Major Mackenzie and Leslie Street, because those are walking distance to a transit route. Those ones are reduced to 2, recommended 2 total for 4 units. The balance of the town that doesn't have the complete services as optimal as they are on Yonge Street or Highway 7, or Major Mackenzie as an example, the recommendation is they 3 total parking spaces for 4 units be recommended.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, the problem with this for me is an MTSA on Major Mackenzie is not the same as an MTSA on a subway line. So the fact that it's an MTSA on Major Mackenzie, but there's only 3 trains a day in the morning from that GO station because it's a separate line. If you work downtown, say, you're looking at an hour-and-a-half commute. If you're forced to take public transit, I feel like it's not just a hindrance to not require parking for the homeowner who decides to make other units. It's a hindrance to the person who wants to live there, because we're really sentencing them to long commutes, because an MTSA, as I said, you know, on Yonge Street within walking distance of the Aurora GO train, for example, is totally different public transit scenario. That's just my comment. I know there's nothing we can do about it, but really it's not good to not have parking on, especially around Major Mackenzie. Mr. Theodoros, I wanted to thank him for his thoughtful comments. And I too am worried about things like Airbnbs. If I know the city's working on bylaws for Airbnbs, but what's to stop someone from making, you know, I'll live in one and 3 of my units will be rentals, and then all of a sudden neighbors are living beside a motel, not a residential neighborhood. For you, Mr. Chair, is there anything we can do about that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the proposal before us is not dealing with STRs specifically. Obviously, generally the city does not regulate STRs. They are considered a residential use at the moment. If council so wishes to address that either through zoning considerations, which are limited, quite frankly, or as other jurisdictions have done, is bring forward licensing. But obviously those have implications to financial implications to the city if that is so done.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I guess this is a comment because I don't know if anyone here has the exact answer, but while it's as of right, you still have to get a permit, right? You still have to have permits to build these things. So I'm interested on a tax level. If I have 4 units, and so that's 4 times the garbage, 4 times the recycling, 4 times the water, 4 times the whatever. We saw some slides on infrastructure stress. Is it the city's plan, or has there been discussion about how, there'll be a different tax structure for homeowners that add on units and different expectations of how to support the folks living there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that would be generally addressed through the works departments, and the garbage, it's required to be put out whenever. There'll just be more, if you will, and that will be something that we have to deal with the infrastructure team, because they need to appreciate that there are more units that generate more waste, if you will. So there are restrictions as to how much you can put out, but the waste delivery has to understand that there are additional units now.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why staff want to identify where these are located specifically through internal documentation, not only to deal with the sanitary and water concerns that might arise, but also to inform fire department of where these things are. That may institute a municipal addressing provision, if you will, for these, so fire department knows exactly where they are. By the same token, we would have to advise the works department that this property has 4 units, if you will. So when they see extra garbage at the curb, that they don't just provide those little stickers saying you've exceeded the amount, if you will.
Right, but,
Right?
well, through you, Mr. Chair, I know this, I feel like it's all part of the same thing. So I do think that, you know, the tax issues and it's not about for, you know, extra stickers on bags. It's that there are, you know, you're allowed 3 bags every other week and there's 4 buildings, 4 apartments or whatever we want to call them, 4 units. I'm asking if the city, in terms of, you know, taxing and figuring out services, has been involved in this up to this point. But I'm assuming, like, I'm pretty sure we won't go gung ho with this without considering that. But because it's necessary.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, part of the consideration on that is uptake, if you will. Since 2021, there really has not been a significant draw on ARUs of any significant number specifically. They're usually 1 per property, specifically in Richmond Hill. So until such time as you see a significant problem with it, at that point in time, we most likely will have to address it. But we would understand, because of the uptake, considerations through staff, what should happen with respect to fire services and waste and infrastructure otherwise.
Great, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I think my first apartment was a basement apartment. I loved it. I think there's room in this community for all kinds of housing. I don't know the answer to this, but has Richmond Hill Fire and Emergency Services been consulted in terms of a 4-meter in between? Like, it sounds to me like a real narrow stretch between places. I'm just interested to know if emergency services has been part of the planning process.
To you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we have spoken specifically to fire and emergency. As I mentioned earlier, the development standards for the primary dwelling are not changing, which are typically 1.2, 1.5 on one side, where depending on the zoning bylaw. What we're also requiring through this amendment is a free and clear 1 meter of that 1.2. So there's no encroachments permitted within that walking distance, say air conditioner, if you will, or any other protrusion that might impede that clear access to the door of the unit. Well, and one of the requirements that we're recommending, if you need an air conditioner, it has to be above 2 meters on the wall, basically above the height that would impede any access to the unit.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, my final comment is, like, I guess we'll wait and see what the uptake is, but it does worry me that in residential areas we'll have, you know, single family, and it's even in your drawing, single family home, 4 stories, single family home. That kind of thing sticks out. It doesn't really blend into what the look of the neighborhood is. And we've already seen upset residents when there's one massive house on a street that normally isn't 4 stories or 3 stories. So I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but it is a concern for me in terms of keeping the look of a neighborhood and the complexion.
Thank you. Regional Local Councillor Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I just said it out of context. The fact that we have different parties in this whole project team, given my colleagues already, raised I would say, the breadth of different issues. I mean, given that really, not just Richmond Hill, municipalities, we are still at the mercy of the province. And Bill 185 was mentioned that actually minister can do things that allow for enhancement and make regulation to change things relating to the additional residential units. I gather that missing middle was called missing middle for a reason, because it touches on so many intertraining things for us to digest and understand. Having said that, my sense is that the objective is really increase the supply of housing units. And partly it's also driven by what we got, the $31 billion from the federal government for the Housing Accelerator Fund. But to what extent, unless I miss it, there's a potential linkage or within the city permission on doing this is factor in the affordable residential unit, another ARU, through Mr. Chair. Is there any way work that in through Mr. Chair on this permission that maybe the city eventually approve?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the question of affordability is not a direct one with respect to ARUs. They usually becomes affordable because of the scale, if you wish, of the unit, because it's a basement apartment. So it's not going to be the same as a single family or an apartment condominium, if you will. But you really cannot control the individual price that way, because it is an individual held property, and the market will dictate what the market will dictate for those types of units. But the scale of the unit itself may dictate a lesser rent, if you will, because of that specific size constraint.
Thank you. So it's not explicit, but yeah, we can see how it works out. I'm not going to ask question, but I just comment, and actually it happens to be on slide number 15 of presentation that summarized quite a number of things. And also so happens on page 15 of the staff report that have a number of things that caught my attention, such as no balconies, no rooftop, no home occupation, no, a number of things. So it's quite a bit of restrictive permission, so to speak, for this ARU, not affordable, but additional residential unit. I'm wondering that, and a number of my colleagues already touched on, the uptake. We're talking about all this, but at the end of the day, like we are doing eventually in December, a change and amend to allow this to have the I guess 4 units as additional residential units and increase the maximum height of the major transit station areas. And I did take note of both my colleague as well as the delegate talking about not all MTSU are created equal. Other than that comment, and I have to say that word as of right is kind of really make me nervous. And yes, it might still have to go through that permit system, but then as of right, that we have to see how it works out. But one thing I do want to come back to ask questions from Mr. Chair, because when the project lead in her presentation did say have a benchmarking study, and I think the staff report did say under current, for the 3 units, the uptake is 0.5. And then I see somewhere as assumption the uptake for the 4 unit might be 10%. Through Mr. Chair, is it 10% I'm citing just now? Is that the assumption for the 4 unit? Should council eventually approve to make the changes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the 10% was picked to deal with the modeling for the sanitary sewer and water main issue. 10% across the city would represent approximately 15,000 units overall. So that's quite a large number. that we don't obviously expect to occur overnight to anywhere, but it's a reason. We thought it was a reasonable assumption based on the uptake that Brampton has envisioned over the last few years, and they have over 21,000 registered ARUs in the ground as of today. But they have a different experience, if you will.
Thank you. I, for one, I'm not convinced that we are necessarily seeing Brampton as a comparable, but that's an issue another day. But it struck me with the 3-unit uptake is only 0.5%. I really wonder, we can get to that magnitude. So I don't want to say our discussions here are not academic, but we should be concerned. We should be raising comments as also councillors responsible for this municipality. But at the end of the day, I'm really thinking about the context. Like we're going through this. At the end of the day, the uptake may be not that much. But of course, we have to raise our concern and keep consulting. At the end of the day, it's not part of today, but education is very important for residents to understand where these changes are coming from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just make a couple of comments. We have one councillor wants a second round. So a lot of the questions that I specifically had have been addressed, but in no particular order. I had a meeting today at a company in Richmond Hill that provides pretty good paying jobs. And one of the things that came up today was the ability for them to attract good paying jobs to their facility. And it's not easy. They have to work hard at that. But one of the things was interesting in this discussion is that they were saying that they are competing with places that are offering more affordable housing that have the same jobs in their community. So if you're got to commute for 2 hours from a place that has more affordable housing and you could be doing the same job in your own hometown, why would you come to Richmond Hill? So this all right now boils down to economic development. I mean, it boils down to other things too, but I just think it's important to remember that if we're to stay competitive from an economic development point of view with neighboring municipalities who, let's face it, we're competing with, we got to make sure that we're doing all the things that we can do to do the best we can for our citizens. And affordable housing is very much related to that. I always think of affordable housing as kind of the lower pay end of the spectrum, but having spoken to this company today, it's not just the minimum wage earners. It's also, wage earners that are making a decent amount of money but can't afford a $1.8 million house. So having said that, I think one of the things that I just want to reiterate here is the building code requires a whole suite of requirements that we haven't talked about here today. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why no matter what municipality you're in Ontario that is contemplating this, there are hurdles that people who own property still have to comply with. And that's probably one of the reasons why the uptick on this particular initiative is not going to be enormous. I mean, it will grow over time. But it isn't like, the day that we pass something like this, we're not going to rush out and have 10,000 units all boom just like that, because there's a process that they need to go and there's requirements that they need to go. And the requirements under the building code, in some cases, have a cost that's not insignificant. And they're also very important because they deal with fire safety and real important things like that. So there are governors on some of the concerns that residents are having with this. And I get it. I understand why residents might have a concern with, having 4 units next to their home. And I fully respect that. But I think that there are enough rules of engagement built into the regulations that we're contemplating, plus rules of engagement for the building code, and plus just practical market-based governors on this, that we're not going to see the rotation of the earth changed for the worse because of this. In fact, I would argue that we are going to be offering options that are not necessarily available today to our residents once a regulation like this passes. And for those that are in need of renting an ARU, those people will be very thankful, I would hope, that we have provided an affordable option for housing for them for whatever period of life that they happen to be in. The sewer allocation is interesting. I didn't actually contemplate that we would have any concerns about that. And I'm really glad that staff has done the rigor on this. But I have to say, given the fact that I don't think we're going to see people rushing out, it is something to think about over a medium to long term, but it probably isn't going to be an issue right away. But I have to say that if we ever got to the point where sewer allocation really is a significant issue in a particular location, surely we could implement some sort of an allocation-based issue to say, we've reached capacity in this area, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That's exactly why one of the recommendations is that the current policies on servicing allocation be reviewed to see how it can address ARUs over time. We want to keep an eye on it, just like we do for consents or any other form of infill and development that's permitted in a town. This is a unique one because it's not development as traditionally defined, because it's just a building permit. Right. So because of that, we want to make sure that we have the tools moving forward to collect the information, monitor the situations over time.
Okay. I got a couple more points. Why don't I leave it there? Councillor Thompson, you want to do a second round? I'll come back to me on a second round after you.
Thank you very much, through the chair. Certainly, I'm certainly in favor of the initiative that has brought this forward, in that this should provide more housing available to more people. So, from that standpoint, I love that, but I really feel we got to make sure that we get this right. And Mr. Theodore had brought up a point about Airbnbs, and so particularly if we're as part of this, we're going to waive, the parking requirements. And now all of a sudden, if somebody, happens to be in an MTSA and they thinking, oh, this will be a perfect way to help pay my mortgage, I can do this as an Airbnb, then, I think we as a council will have to think about, can we or are we allowed to put any types of provisions in place whereby if somebody does do the uptick on this in a location where the parking is being waived, would we be allowed to put in a provision that says, well, the parking is only waived if you're not, making this an Airbnb? So that would be my first question here.
Through the chair to Councillor Thompson, there is an opportunity to look at these things as part of the comprehensive zoning bylaw and take a look at specifically short-term rental. So I think there's an opportunity there, and then I've made a record of the comment for us to consider in the future.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just wondering, if that is something that we would be able to make stick with our own bylaws and not be superseded, but obviously we can always be superseded. So kind of useless to ask that question, I guess. I think I'll leave all my comments right there, and you take that as a takeaway. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else in a second round? Okay, so I'll just finish off. So I want to talk a little bit about parking. And I have to say, I am perplexed frequently about the idea of how much parking do we supply. I understand that we have a reasonably developed but still developing transit system. And there probably are provisions where people are living close to transit that don't need a car. But the reality is, for the not too distant future, at least, we are going to have people that are going to need access to an automobile in some form or another. I would like us to be looking at advocating, if I get in, there are areas where we have no choice. Under provincial legislation, we have no ability to dictate minimum parking standards. And I understand that we have nothing to do about that. That's fine. But where we do have the ability to ask for parking, I really do think there does need to be an ability to have us dictate that there's minimum parking standards. And I think they need to be reasonable. Because, at the end of the day, we are doing no favors by not making sure that we have adequate parking in a unit where there are in fact people with say 4 cars and there's only 2 places to park. What are they going to do with those other cars? And I mean, I know they should know that when they rent the place, and the landlord should tell them, but there are going to be situations that, you know, gee whiz, I signed a lease, I got a car, or your situation changes and I have to drive now to wherever, and you know, that becomes a problem. So, and those complaints are going to end up on our doorstep. So I think we need to do as much as we can. Now, I realize it might not be perfect, but I think we need to do whatever we can do in a situation like that. And I will also say that in the situations where there are 0 parking standards, that doesn't necessarily mean that the landlord is going to not provide parking, because in many cases, the landlord, him or herself, is not doing themselves any favors by, you know, the market won't bear, like, you know, I have a car, you're going to rent me this unit, but you don't have a parking space. I'll move on to the next person that does have a parking space. So that, I think, will regulate itself to some degree, but I think we need to do our part. I just want to emphasize too, and you know, we are already doing 3. So this is really not that much more. It's 4, right? And I also just wanted to just emphasize that, you know, municipalities like Richmond Hill and anywhere else in the GTA, any of the mayors that I speak to, you know, we're all dealing with the same affordability crisis. And generally speaking, most municipalities are heading in this direction, right? And so I think it's important to remember that, you know, the past model where you had subdivisions of exclusively single detached homes with 1 family living in there, you know, 2 cars in the garage and 2 point whatever children. But those days are really not the same as they are today. And, you know, we need to be moving with the times. And frankly, I think it's incumbent on us as municipalities that are trying to have an eye to the future to make sure that we're pursuing this proactively. Like, we're not just being led, we are leading. And I think that this regulation and this approach is doing the best that we can in that regard. And in just the last point I wanted to make, I just want to remind council and people watching and so on that, you know, we do have an affordable housing task force that we've been working on for quite some time, even before this term of council. And a lot of the types of things that we're discussing tonight are actually things that are in that affordability housing task force document. And when we first started talking about this, what, 5, 6 years, 4, 5, 6, whatever it was years ago, a lot of these concepts were a little bit aspirational, but a lot of the concepts that were aspirational at that time are now starting to become very real, as the, you know, the need to produce housing, and particularly affordable housing, is growing in communities, not just Richmond Hill, but in other places as well. So anyway, this is a big issue. I do agree with Mr. Theodoros that, you know, it is too bad that we don't get lots and lots and lots of people coming out to these things. But, you know, that's another reality that we live in, is that, you know, people are leading very busy lives, and sometimes they don't always jump up and give input. But I think that the input that we have received so far up to this point, I suspect from my experience, you know, as mayor, is pretty representative of the types of things that I heard. So regardless of whether we did get more people, I wouldn't have expected to hear proportionately different comments that are being made. So I think in a lot of ways, this is a pretty representative sample of what we've got. So anyway, that being said, we have a motion on the floor, and all those in favor, opposed, that carries. Okay, thank you very much. And the last thing is the exciting moment we've all been waiting for, which is a motion to adjourn. And Councillor Davidson's really wanting to do that. Councillor Tree, all those in favor, opposed, carried. And we'll see you all back here at 9:30 tomorrow morning, bright and early. So have your coffee ready.